Next up in our 24 hours of crazy, as Mike has described this to me, which yeah, it's kind of right, is Mike Mansfield for his class searching for your family in New York City, resources and techniques at MyHeritage and beyond. So I'd like to introduce you to Mike here, and I'm going to turn the time over to him. So, Mike, welcome to the marathon, and good to have you here.
Thank you, Jeff. Everything's ready to go?
Yep, looks good. All yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. It's my pleasure to be here, and this is certainly an exciting topic, and we have a really cool announcement that we've been working on for a long time that we're be talking about here in just a few moments. So my name is Mike Mansfield. You can read some of my bio here. I have some background in computer science and a degree from Syracuse. I started at Ancestry in the 90s, a long time ago, and I worked there for about 10 years, and then Family Search, and this is about 10 and a half years at MyHeritage. So I'm trying to work for all of the main genealogy companies, I guess. At MyHeritage, I'm the Director of Content Operations, and when I speak to people at conferences or events, I'd like to talk to them about where their family is from, and I can't do that here, but my family is from the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, as well as England, Wales, and colonial America, meaning I have some people I don't know where they came from when I find them here in colonial America, and then a small branch from Germany, or what was Prussia. Previously, I've served on the Federation of Genealogical Societies board, and I'm currently also serving on the National Genealogical Society. Let me try that again. National Genealogical Society Development Committee. All right, today's outline, we're going to talk about a few minutes just on New York City's jurisdictions. They're a little different than what we may be accustomed to if you're not familiar. And then the big announcement that I have for you today is a really cool new set of collections of New York City vital records of births, marriages, and deaths. One of the seminal moments in my career certainly will be the release of these collections, which happened just in the last 3 days leading up to this event this evening. We'll talk a little bit about immigration. New York City as a port is unrivaled in the Americas for a destination of immigrants coming to North America. Well over 70% of all immigrants did transit through the port of New York, and we'll look at some really cool information about the Port of New York and how to use those records. And if time allows, a few comments about two particular record classes that I selected to look a little bit more into: the World War I draft registrations as an excellent resource for research in New York and elsewhere as well. And then city directories can also be extremely helpful. This is an expansive topic. We could easily spend many hours on different aspects of materials that I just had to cut. Like, I wish I could have included a half-hour talk about state censuses for New York and those that particularly apply to New York City. I apologize. I just had to limit some of our scope here this evening. Let's first look at the boroughs and counties of New York City. So the boroughs are the 5 governmental districts that compose the city of New York. And each borough is coextensive. That's a fancy word for meaning the boroughs have the same geography as respective counties that sit within them, or they're the same jurisdiction and geography. So we have the borough of Manhattan, which is also the county of New York, Brooklyn, or Kings County, Queens County, the Bronx, which is Bronx County, and Staten Island, which is Richmond County. There's really 2 boroughs here that can trip us up, which is Brooklyn being Kings County and Staten Island being Richmond. The one sort of trick that I use to remember that Brooklyn is Kings is, of the boroughs, the only borough that has the letter K in it is Brooklyn, and hence that's a way that I remember that that's Kings County. So the 5 boroughs came into existence with the creation of what we know today as New York City in 1898. And you'll see that year pop up in just a few minutes when we talk about the vital records this year of 1898. when New York County, then including part of the Bronx, Kings County, or again, what we know as Brooklyn, Richmond County, or Staten Island, and part of Queens County were consolidated within one municipal government under a new city charter, and all former municipalities within the new consolidated city were dissolved. When we think about New York City, it's certainly easy to think of the greater New York City area, which includes these counties going off to the east of the map here into Long Island, showing Nassau as one of those counties. Counties going up to the north into the state of New York, Westchester, and then the counties to the west that are in New Jersey, Bergen, Hudson, Essex, Union, Passaic, and Middle Essex. Lovely records are available in New Jersey and these other parts of the state of New York that are outside of these 5 boroughs or 5 counties of New York City. Unfortunately, I also wasn't able to include a lot of really any information about those. Again, a wonderful topic would be the greater New York metropolitan area as well. All right, so what's the big news? The big news this evening and in the last couple days, we've culminated over a year-long process to create a brand new set of indexes with associated color images of the New York City births, marriages, and deaths. And I'll go over some particulars of each one of these in just a minute. Yeah, really some of the coolest or most important vital records in the United States are these from New York City. What we did with the indexing work is we paid particular attention to the secondary individuals that were named on these records. And when we talk about a secondary individual, think about a marriage record, for example, where you'll have the bride and the groom, but it's very common in marriage records like this where we have the certificates and or the licenses that will have the parents of both the bride and the groom as well. And it's common that those secondary individuals, such as parents, can get skipped in other indexing efforts. We made a very deliberate decision here to spend a lot of time and effort to index not only the primary individuals, again, such as a marriage, the bride and the groom, but also the parents of both the bride and the groom. There are some witnesses, and you'll see some examples of those that we did not index. So there still is a lot of value in, as always, looking at the associated image in these certificates and looking at what other information you can glean about who the witnesses were, particularly in a marriage or in the case of a death, who was reporting the death, oftentimes family members that can give you very important clues. Before I jump into some examples of these really amazing records, let's look at some of the time coverage of these. And these are images that were published by the New York Municipal Archive. And they're the ones that have been doing the digitization, and we owe them certainly a debt of gratitude for their efforts. So for births, you see that we have different coverage based on the borough. You notice there in the Bronx, we don't get birth records until 1895, Kings 1855, or Brooklyn. Manhattan, much earlier coverage starting in 1866 as well, Queens and Richmond that you see. It can maybe be a little bit disheartening to think, wow, we only have births to 1909, which is about a 115-year privacy rule. This isn't too abnormal, I guess, especially if we look at other countries that have such a privacy cutoff. And then many states in the country didn't start doing vital records at all until, say, the 1910s or so, early 1900s. So in general, New York City here is well above average, or sort of very progressive in their official collection of these very important vital records. Let's look at deaths, and they'll go to marriages last because it's got a little bit more complexity. So deaths, again, starting in 1898 when the city was officially formed from those 5 counties and boroughs for the Bronx, Queens, and Richmond, or Staten Island. But really robust coverage of deaths from 1862 for Kings or Brooklyn. Manhattan, there is a gap that the archive is still, or excuse me, the municipal archive is still digitizing. So that's maybe one thing to be certainly aware of. Whoops. is that big section there. I thought I had an animation. There it is. That section there that I've just highlighted in this pinkish red color of records that have not been made digitally available yet. So we're watching, and when those will become available, we will certainly add those to this collection. The marriages are of the three types, certainly the most complicated, and so we have a set of certificates with good coverage for all 5 boroughs, at least from 1898, and extra good coverage for Kings or Brooklyn and Manhattan from 1866, and then marriage licenses from 1938 to 1949, with the exception of the Bronx. So the New York City Department of Health issued marriage certificates through 1937, and that's represented in the top set of bar graphs there. And beginning in 1908, in compliance with New York state law, couples planning to marry obtained a license from the city clerk, and the city clerk marriage license typically included an affidavit filled out by the couple and the license issued by the clerk and a certificate completed by the person performing the ceremony. It's pretty complicated, and we'll see some examples. Basically, we've tried to make this all kind of not relevant to people who will be using this collection. We've included all of the documents together in a set, and so if there's both a certificate and a license, you'll see those, or if there's one or the other, you'll see that as well. Because there are potentially 2 separate records of a marriage for the period from 1908 through 1937. There's the health department certificate and the city clerk license. The recorded information in these is mostly duplicative. However, the city clerk license includes additional information about the couple's parents and occupations, which can obviously be extremely helpful. But just be aware that this gap here in the Bronx from 1938 to 1949 is, when we compare this to the other boroughs, certainly a gap in coverage. And like I just said for deaths, we're watching for those, and we'll be adding those as soon as they become available. Let's switch now over to a few examples that I've prepared. So here on MyHeritage, what's the best way to find these? One way I like to do it is just type new. So let me back up a little bit. So I'm going to come to MyHeritage. I'm going to go to our research menu, and we'll go to collection catalog. And here in the search bar, I'm just going to type New York City, and they all start in 1866. And so this should probably bring up, right here at the top of my search, these 3. So we have marriages, deaths, and births. I'm going to first go to births, and I've prepared some searches here just to save some typing and me fumbling with some hard names to type. So here's an example of a New York City birth record for a Sophia Wilhelmina Henrietta Wiggins, quite a long name, and she was born in 1882 in Manhattan. And then if we scroll down, we get this wonderful color digital image, and we get to see other information here. So we get her gender, her date of birth, which was in the index, and her place of birth, so 252 West 35th Street, and the name of the father, Henry Wiggins, and the full name of the mother. But what's really awesome on line 6 there we see the maiden name of the mother was expressly asked for on the document. That is just tremendously important to us to understand the name of the mother, or the mother's maiden surname at least. And then really cool as well, we get the birthplace of the mother and the father. In this example, it just says Germany. I've seen many cases though where it's more specific. I've seen, for example, I've seen many cases where I'm getting the county in Ireland for people of Irish descent. We get the age of both the mother and the father, and the occupation of the father there as well. Another very interesting thing about this document is it tells us the number of children this mother has had and how many of them are currently living. Obviously very helpful in reconstituting families and helping us understand children that have maybe passed away or children that we're unaware of that we can go ahead and search for. Also now, because we have the names of the parents in our indexes, we can use those names to great effect in finding additional children. Let's look at a second example of a birth record. So here's an Edward Braithwaite, and you see the information we have in the index, the birthday, information about the father and the mother, and then this, again, wonderful image here. So Edward Braithwaite, father's occupation, I think that's maybe chauffeur, the race or color of the child, information about the birth date. Obviously, you guys can read all this, the father's name, the mother's name before marriage. Again, that's really cool that they're asking that. And I like this example. The father was born in England and the mother was born in France. And again, how many children they've had and how many all are living. These records do evolve over time, and you'll see other examples, as I've shown you just in these two, some differences in the form. Let's next look at some marriages. So here's an example that I picked of a George Eugene Ottoson and a Mary Emma McKay. The marriage records are just packed full of incredible information. Here we have a 49-year-old gentleman who's marrying a 23-year-old young woman. It's a little bit of a weird situation, but as we look at the record, we'll discover some more information. So we get, again, the name of the groom, George Ottoson, and his bride, Mary Emma McKay, and information about their age. At some point, they wrote 50 and then struck that out and wrote 49. And this tells us that this person was born in Norway, and we also get, I think, the name of a Norwegian location there, and the full name of the father, and the full maiden name of the mother, again, giving us her maiden surname, as well as the country of birth. And same thing here on the right-hand side where we get information about the bride, just incredible information, and their signatures. How cool is that to see a real-life signature of your family member from many decades ago? You'll see up here in this part of the screen, we show how many documents or pages are in this record. And so let's scroll through these on the next page. And of course, it's not going to work for me. Let's try that again. There we go, second page. So this is blank. I think this is mostly to do if someone of minor age is being married and requirements for parental consent. Document 3 here, or page 3 of 4, is this license. It tells us up here this is a license, not a certificate. You can kind of read through that. It's just kind of some bureaucratic process that they're putting forth. Place of residence is listed here for the groom and the bride, and I find it interesting that their place of residence is the same place right now. Maybe this is where they intend to live together. I'm uncertain that they were maybe living. It's possible, I guess, they were living together before they were married. I'm not exactly sure how to interpret that. Again, information about the father and the mother. Places of birth, Port Washington, Long Island for the bride. And then let's look at the last document here. So document 4 of 4. So here is the final certificate that was filled out by the minister. So Reverend Ludwig W. Jansen, a minister of the gospel, residing in Brooklyn, but he performed the marriage here in Kings, in the county of Kings, or Brooklyn. And what I also find interesting here is we get the names of 2 witnesses, this Mary Zachariason, and as well as a Kara Zachariason. And if you look down here at the bottom, we see these 2 witnesses with their signature and also with their address, and their address is the same. So perhaps this is some sort of family member or acquaintances that obviously these people or this couple have chosen to come and witness their marriage. It's interesting here we get the name of the church, so Bethelship, probably Norwegian Methodist Church in Kings County or Brooklyn, and again the day of the marriage. Let's switch over and look at one more example of a marriage. Here's an example of a Joseph L. Quelch and a Mary I. Kennedy. So very similar, as you've seen before, information about the bride and the groom, occupations of the bride and groom. So the groom here is an accountant. The bride is a typist. The birthplace of the groom is Brooklyn, New York. I find this one interesting. The bride is from Newfoundland. This marriage was from 1943. Newfoundland didn't actually join the Canadian Federation until 1849, I think. So Newfoundland was kind of its own political entity at the time. So it makes sense that they didn't write, I guess, Canada there. The mother of the bride was also born in Newfoundland, as was the father. Full name of the mother. I mean, that is just so awesome, of both mothers of the bride and the groom. And then more signatures of both of the bride and the groom, and 4 documents again in this example. And I don't know why it's not wanting to go to the second page. So again, an empty consent form. I haven't seen these filled out very often, but I imagine they do exist. A very similar document to like the one I showed you before, again, repeating some of the same information, but to me, it's wonderful that we get a second attempt at the names. Many of these have been typed, as you see here. And then on the back side, it's always interesting to look at these additional witnesses. We have a Robert J. Quelch and maybe a Rose Kennedy, and it gives us their addresses, which I also like to compare with the address of the bride and the groom to see how they relate. Yeah, so the witness, this Rose Kennedy, is showing the same address as the bride, and the Robert Quelch is showing the same address as the groom. Some additional clues there that we can use. Let's next dive into the deaths, and I have 2 examples here. So here's Alice Mary Balchin, born in Nova Scotia, Canada, and she died as a widow, and death occurred in 1948. We get the name of a mother and a father. Again, this was a fairly aged person, I believe, when she did pass away. So these parents are probably long since passed as well. Let's go look at an example image. This has 2 images here in the set, 1 of 2. Lots of other information here about their usual residence, their exact place of death, whether it's in a hospital or perhaps a specific street address, their hour of their death, things about the attending physician, all sorts of information here again about the name of the husband. So this is she was the wife of Oscar, probably Oscar Balchin, I would imagine. Information about the cemetery. So she's buried in Greenwood Cemetery, and the burial date. I mean, it just doesn't get better as a genealogist, right, to see these incredible vital records. And let's go look at page 2. And information again about the funeral and who was sort of requesting these services. And it looks like it's a Natalie Balchin, I believe stated here as a daughter. So other information about other family members. And the last example we'll look at here again, another death, is a Rebecca Andresen, residing usually in the Bronx. Information about her residence. Similarly to what you've seen before, occupation, date of birth, right? We're getting a full date of birth in these death records. I mean, that's really cool. Information here about the exact cause of death. Sometimes we're looking for that to understand potential health issues in our family. Signature of the informant, and it's the husband. So the husband, this Andreas Andresen, was the informant. The place of burial, Bell House Cemetery, and the burial date. And I think I have a cookie that's timing out or something. I prepared these a few hours ago, so just refreshing that. And information again about the funeral. So those are the New York City birth, marriage, and deaths, a brand new index with millions of the secondary names available on MyHeritage just in the last, let's say, 72 hours. Certainly one of the highlights of my career has been working on this collection, which we started well over a year ago. Let's move on next to the discussion about New York passenger arrival records. I always like this photograph. Here's a family, I think in about 1914. They're standing on Ellis Island. They're looking across the Hudson to Lower Manhattan. And this building right here is what I'm pretty sure is the Woolworth building, which was finished in 1913. And until 1930, that was the tallest building, the tallest man-made building in the world until 1930. So it's kind of like, if you go to where the Burj Khalifa is and seeing this incredible structure, you're going to kind of be awed by it. All right, some brief history of the passenger arrival records. We really start in 1818. Obviously, passengers were, people were immigrating to North America well before 1880, but we have very few sort of consolidated records until some of these things that led up to a law that I'll present here in just a moment, or some information about it. So December 1818, Representative Thomas Newton of Virginia, he proposes a bill to regulate and reform passenger ships entering ports from abroad. And this was primarily due to very dangerous overcrowding conditions that were occurring on these ships. Here in this third bullet, of approximately 5,000 passengers who sailed from Antwerp, Belgium for the United States in the previous year, no fewer than 1,000 had died before reaching their destination port. One ship sailing from a European port, more than 700 of almost 1,300 persons aboard died in transit, well over 50%. Congress acted quickly. Wouldn't that be nice if they could act quickly in our modern day? But on March 2nd, 1918, it enacted legislation and brought about the Steerage Act of 1819, also called the Act to Regulate Passenger Ships and Vessels. Throughout a number of the next few slides, you'll see this word steerage. Steerage is the term that refers to the lowest, least expensive class of accommodation that these ships offered or that they sold tickets for. And the vast majority of people on these ships were in steerage class, well over probably 80 to 90%. So under this new act, masters or captains of vessels arriving at American ports from abroad were required to submit a list or a manifest of all passengers to the collector of customs in the port where the ship arrived, in the port where the ship arrived. And all known custom passenger lists have been accessioned by the National Archives. There is known to have been loss in customs passenger lists from San Francisco, which were destroyed by fires in both 1840 and 1851. It looks like the these customs passenger lists for the Port of New York did survive fairly well, going back to 1820. Later, by 1882, Congress passed additional legislation, really several times, working up to this 1882 law, as it became apparent that a more serious reform was required, and the Immigration Act of 1882 was passed. Greater provisions against overcrowding, requiring onboard ships to have a hospital and a doctor with medicines and supplies, and also to provide 3 cooked meals. And even I kind of enjoyed this, a specific size requirement on the berth or the position or sort of cot or bunk that you were assigned to sleep in, of not less than 2 feet in width and 6 feet in length. That's pretty small. So these records were accessioned by the National Archives, and they microfilmed them, and the National Archives published 2 sets, passenger lists of vessels arriving in New York, 1820 to 1897, and the other one, passenger and crew lists of vessels arriving at New York, 1897 to 1957. What's most common in our domain, such as at MyHeritage and the other players' Ancestry, etc., you'll often see these 2 sets combined together, and I want to provide some information about the background of these, because these records do evolve quite a bit over time. But first, let's look a little bit about the crossing, give us some more historical understanding. So a steerage class ticket from Liverpool to New York in 1845 cost about 3 to 5 pounds. The voyage at that time usually was taking 3 to 6 weeks, and these packet ships, as they were called, would carry between 200 and 300 passengers. On the right-hand side here, here's an example of a common billboard that would have been plastered around a port. And I love this marketing here. So the ship, the Friends, arrived lately from Charleston, I believe Charleston, South Carolina, in 21 days. That's certainly something to boast about. Has superior furnished accommodations for passengers and a cow on board to supply them with milk. I get a kick out of that because I think a milk cow each day can produce a couple gallons of milk, and you divide that by a couple hundred people, and that's not going to go very far, I guess. But also maybe that was for additional cost. Anyways, who knows exactly what they're offering with this milk cow, but I just love the marketing. By the 1910s and 1920s, ships had obviously evolved quite a bit, and we have an example here of the Aquitania, built just a year or two after the Titanic had sunk, and the voyage at this point was taking about 6 to 10 days. The Aquitania, if you add up all of the passenger accommodation list that I show there, has well over 4,000 people on board, and over half of them being in third class steerage, again, as we would call it. Over 70, as I mentioned at the beginning, over 70% of all immigrants to the United States did come through the Port of New York. Prior to 1855, custom agents met ships at the various piers in the city to collect passenger lists. So prior to 1855 to 1920, there's no sort of official immigration station, so to speak. It's just wherever the ship was assigned to dock, and somehow the custom agents knew to go there and collect these lists. Starting in 1855 until 1890, the immigration station was located at Castle Garden, there in Lower Manhattan. And from 1890 to 1891, the immigration station was located at the barge office, sort of on the eastern side of Lower Manhattan. I'll show a map in just a moment. During this period of 1820 to 1891, just over 11 million immigrants arrived in the port of New York. That is a tremendous, just a huge number, right? This is what, 2 times the current population of Norway today in that time period, just as a weird comparison. So where are these places? So the Castle Garden in Lower Manhattan is still, I think the building's still there today, and there's kind of a park around it. The barge office was over here. I believe it's been demolished quite some time ago. And then Ellis Island would be sort of off the picture down here to the lower left. All right, so let's talk about Ellis Island, obviously very famous. But as you've seen, just because your ancestor may have come through the Port of New York did not mean that they necessarily came through Ellis Island. Obviously, if they immigrated before 1892, Ellis Island wasn't established or built really at all. But on January 2nd, 1892, it opened, and I love this story. Annie Moore, a 15-year-old girl from County Cork, Ireland, was the first immigrant to enter the immigration building on Ellis Island, and she was presented with a $10 gold piece to commemorate her role in U.S. history. I think that's really awesome. And you may be thinking, well, I've been to Ellis Island, or I've seen pictures of it, and that building on the bottom left doesn't look like the building I remember. And you would be correct, because in 1897, a fire destroyed the first Ellis Island building, and the barge office was again used as the official immigration station until the reopening of Ellis Island occurred in 1900. So the second Ellis Island building, still standing today, and I think many of us have been there, seen pictures, is considered one of the first fireproof buildings ever constructed. So when we look at immigration, there's this really cool graph from this book, The Source, and what I like to do is take this graph and flip it on its side, and we can see the social economic effects of things such as the very top there. The Great Famine in Ireland caused a massive influx in people coming to the United States, again, primarily through the Port of New York. Other things that were economic drivers, such as the Homestead Act of 1862, and then a long list there in the late 1800s of panics. That's what historical economists like to call these sort of depressions or recessions that were occurring, these different panics and depressions. So when the economy here in the United States was suffering, that seemed to be a natural braking or headwind to people wanting to come here to the United States. Then other examples such as World War I in 1914 causing a massive drop-off in immigration, a depression there again in 1921, and the Immigration Act of 1924 which more or less radically changed immigration policy in the United States and made it much more difficult to immigrate after 1924. I'm going to talk just a moment about some capabilities with New York passenger arrival records that we developed in the last few years, and I just want to make sure that you're aware of what this awesome capability is. So when we've looked at the Ellis Island records and other records from this time period, you'll see passenger manifests like this. This particular one I think is from the 1890s, 1898. And in 1898, they added this question here that's in column 16 at this point. And this question was whether you're going to join a relative, and if so, what relative and their name and address. And so we indexed these, again, secondary names, and added 16 million names and relationships to our New York passenger database. And then a few years later, in 1907, they added another question. So here's the new question in pink, and this other question I just referred to has now been moved over to the right-hand side of a two-page spread. And this new question from 1907 is the name and complete address of nearest relative or friend in country whence the person came from. And we also indexed these secondary names and added 12 million more additional names and relationships from that additional question starting in 1907. Also with the images, we wanted to make it easier for users to see that, hey, there's two sides to this document and you need to kind of look at them together. So we did some pretty complex image processing work. In this example, I'm showing these parts in blue are actually the same image, where the left-hand blue is really showing me the right-hand side of the next page. And so we process this and then we stitch these images together to make one image and aligned the gutter, as it's called, as best we could. And so you can see a record here now in a combined image and read across it in a fairly easy, accessible method. So an example that I want to show you that you can now do are things like this. So here's this Italian gentleman, Ignazio Beravecchio, if I'm saying it correctly. And he occurs now in our index 4 times as both the father of a passenger coming in 1910, he himself coming in 1913, and then a relative of a Pasquale di Petro coming in 1916, and then again as a father in 1920 of a Vito Beravecchio. And so if we were to go to the database and type in Ignazio Beravecchio, and I won't do it here because our time is limited, but I'll just show you. So here is that first record from 1910. So Ignazio is not the primary person here, right? The primary passenger is Francesco, who is the son of Ignazio, because Ignazio is listed as the father from those additional fields. Here is Ignazio himself, immigrating now in 1913, and we get this name of a relative that he's coming to be with, just Giovanni Constantino, and at least the first name of a wife is Francesca. So again, here's Ignazio. We get these other secondary names, again, now searchable also. And again, Ignazio, so the third record is he's, again, not the primary person the record's about. It's about this Pasquale di Petro, but he's listed as a cousin, our Ignazio Beravecchio. Again, from the same place in Italy, this Vizzini, if I'm saying it right, I'm not exactly sure where that is. And then the fourth record is about Vito Beravecchio, and again, so a second son here. So here in these new records, I'm able to very easily find additional family members that may not have been known to me and could be quite perhaps challenging to understand how these people are related. Obviously, censuses and other records can help us, but seeing people in these passenger lists are certainly excellent clues. One record type or collection I did want to point out as a very excellent resource for New York City and all sorts of other places throughout the United States is the World War I draft registrations. 1917 to 1918, a little bit of information about some of the time periods of this act, but basically, let me just get to the bottom here. Congress established several different rules and regulations about who was to be registered at what time periods. Basically, the bottom line here is by the time it finished there in September 1918, all men born between September 12th, 1873 and September 12th, 1900 should have been picked up by this World War I draft registration. Now, it's important to remember that just because men were registered for this draft and certainly in no way means that they actually served in the military or were indeed drafted. I think the United States ended up fielding a expeditionary force of around 2.5 million men. This database is about 25 million total men, so only about 10% of the men listed here would have actually served in World War I. Here's an example of a Patrick Joseph Moore, who, again, born in the Bronx in 1892. And so when we see this, we can get excited. Okay, great, I can go find this guy's birth certificate in that cool database that I spoke about just a half hour ago. And this is where we need to be careful, because well, let me not get ahead of myself. Here's an example of the document. And so we see his name, information about his employment. He has a wife and 2 children. Other information about his build. He has blue eyes and red hair. He's not bald. He's slender. And his signature there in the lower right. But if we were to go to find this birth certificate from 1892, I'd want to remind us that you need to be careful, because if we come back to this chart, we would see that for the Bronx, we have this gap where there aren't any birth records except these special and delayed births before 1895. So the World War I draft database starts to act as a secondary birth index for us, not only for New York City, but for really most of the United States. It's just a tremendous resource because we get those full birth dates in many cases for men prior to most states having started official collection of government vital records. I know I wouldn't have time to dive into this one, so I'm going to list a few resources. I will end on a slide here in just a moment with a number of these URLs, so don't feel like you need to stop and write these down right now. City directories for New York City are tremendously helpful. You'll find a collection both at MyHeritage, at Ancestry, and the New York Public Library itself has a very extensive collection. A little harder to use there at the New York Public Library, but probably worth the effort if you need those resources. And thank you very much. Again, my name is Mike Mansfield. If you don't have time to speak to me this evening, if you did want to field a question, my email address is just mike.mansfield@myheritage.com, and I'd be happy to converse with you via email. And as I promised, here's a few links to some of the collections that I discussed, and I apologize, I realize I left one off there for the deaths, but if you just do that search in the catalog, you'll find those. So with that, let me turn the time back to Jeff.
Well, Mike, first of all, congratulations on this fantastic, career-altering new collection of New York City vitals. And I want to tell you a couple of things, Mike, that you don't yet know. We've had a live brick wall that just crashed during our webinar because of this.
Jeff, you're giving me literally goosebumps. That is so awesome.
I want to tell you what they said.
Yeah.
They said, hooray, exclamation mark. I just found the second marriage for my maternal great-grandfather, something I've wanted to know for years. This is Leah. She says his first wife died in Norway. Congratulations to you, Leah. Mike, it doesn't end there. Herbert tells me that he just found his dad's aunt's marriage license. Karen says the clarity is amazing. She's going to have to replace some of her old photocopies of docs and can't say thank you enough to MyHeritage for this. Just amazing. And I imagine, well, just like I was doing over here on my other monitor, I imagine that lots of us were searching these new collections while you were talking, Mike. So you've done some good things here. tonight for our webinar viewers and I'm certain for people all over the world. So, and Mike, if you could see all of the comments here in the chat, it put a really big smile on your face. So, when you get the survey that shows up immediately afterwards, please and then thank you for filling out that survey and just share your thoughts and maybe what you have just found during this hour and share your thanks there. So sure appreciate that. Well, Mike, let me go over here to my computer for just a second. How exciting is that, Mike?
Yeah, no, it's so awesome and exactly what I hoped, that these records would be of tremendous help.
Yeah.
Not only the new index, but the easy access to the wonderful high quality images with additional information there. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
So thanks to you and everyone at MyHeritage for making that happen. So those of you who have asked, I'll have the replay of this class online this weekend or early next week up at familytreewebinars.com. And this class specifically will be left in the free area indefinitely, so you can go back and watch it as often as you need to. I've shared some links there in your chat about other classes that Mike has taught, and then other classes specific to New York that are in the webinar library, so I hope that you'll enjoy those. Now we've got a door prize, and this time we've got a 1 year to the MyHeritage Complete Plan. And we just passed 20, I think, aren't we at like 20.1 billion records now? Maybe with this now we're at 20.2. I don't know.
I haven't looked at the number today. It's above that somewhere. Okay. I can check, but yeah.
It's fun to see it grow. All right, so we've got. I'm just getting out my door prize picker tool here real quick, and big drum roll and a congratulations to Phil Bartlow. You've got this coming your way. Watch for an email from me probably next week sometime. All right, let's head over here and check for additional questions. Now, in those marriage records, this is one from David, talking about the index. Do you know, are the officiants, the people that perform the marriages, are those indexed in those records?
Yeah, we did not index the witnesses or the officiants or the ministers or the some cases it's like an alderman, civil government officials. So apologize. The best way, go look at those images and you'll be able to find them there. Obviously, if you're trying to search for marriages performed by a specific minister, then that is not going to be easy.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, thanks. Nancy's, so she's wondering, can the new records, can they be downloaded? I mean, you could save them, print them. Just correct me if I'm wrong, Mike.
Yeah. So the full image viewer that I was showing, there's I think a button in the upper right that lets you download those to your computer, and you can save them to your computer, print them, do with them as you would. Yeah,
they're good.
They're public domain images, so.
Okay. Trish is wondering, would the church, would they have additional records of marriage in addition to what we've seen here?
So church records in New York City, obviously a cool topic on its own. Yeah, they would have records based on whatever denomination we're keeping. So I would generally say yes. A lot of those records are not well aggregated. And you'll probably be, looking at, are you going, if it's like, say in the case of the Catholic Church, probably to a diocesan record office. Lots of different denominations there, so they can be a little bit challenging to hunt down.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Mike, any final thoughts before we say goodbye and head to class number 8 in our marathon?
No, it's been my pleasure, and glad to get this one across the finish line. I had this date on my calendar for months, and I wanted to hit it so I could share with you guys these cool new resources. So
Well,
thank you so much for your time.
I was going to say congrats to you, Mike, but really it's congrats to us for now having access to this. And Margaret says, yeah, I just can't wait to get started. So let me know what you find. Send me an email, send Mike an email, put it out on Facebook. Let everybody know. Okay, so we are now going to head over to Carol Baxter on Why Can't I Find It? Locating surnames and online databases. And you know, Carol's always very good and very interesting. So we'll see you all over there in just a few minutes. Thanks, Mike.
We'll see you, Jeff. Bye.
Bye.